welcome to the Angular Walkabout. So the inspiration for this show was I'm in a couple of, hi Sam, a couple of GDE meetings. And if you don't know, that is a Google Developer Expert, which is the Google's advocate program for people who don't work for them, but who advocate for products that they own. And Ivana's cracking me up in the chat. So as we were talking during one of our meetings, something that kept getting brought up, I don't know, over the last few months was beginners and just this desire for leaders in the industry to lower the bar for beginners in the Angular community, just because it can be pretty daunting. And sometimes there are these big concepts that are like, I don't even know how to tackle that. So I'm just not going to tackle that. And so as we were talking about it, this idea started forming in my brain to have a stream that was dedicated only to beginners. And of course, like, this isn't going to solve the problem, but I think the more content that we can put out there for lower level, the easier that it will be to enter the community. And so I am just super pumped about this show. The Angular Walkabout, I invited 5 beautiful people to come on and do their darndest to make whatever topic they felt passionate about beginner friendly. So welcome to the chat. Shout out. We're going to have prizes. So I think, like, hey, Sarah. Hey, Reptime Eye. I see everybody in the chat already talking right now, but please feel free during this entire show to throw out your questions, and I will come on. I'm going to introduce each speaker and let them have the stage, but I will come on during the last 5 minutes or so of their talk and field any questions that they didn't get to. But please, register to win prizes. I'm going to plop that one up because prizes, right? So register to win prizes with that link, but also ask your questions. Tell us where you're watching from. I know we've got international viewers, so good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night. I actually just this morning figured out, if you know what movie I'm talking about, figured out why he had to say that intro. Anyways, we're here. Hey, Ed. Oh, it's good to see you. So I think it's almost time. We're a little early, so I would personally like to ask that everybody in chat. I know it's silly. It's like one of those games that you play when you're like meeting new people and you all sit around in a circle and you say, my name is Alyssa and I'm going to go with Apple Alyssa, that way you can remember my name. So I want to do something similar to that where everybody here, and I'm going to actually change my view. I wonder if, there we go. Okay. Everybody here says where you're from and what you're drinking, if you're drinking anything. I'm drinking iced espresso because I love iced coffee. My parents think it's an abomination, but I don't know what to tell them. I love it. It's absolutely addictive. And it is 10 o'clock my time, and I am in the States, in the central part of the States. So it is early for me, and I'm actually going to welcome on our our first guest of today, Manfred.
Hi.
Hey, Manfred. Okay, so before we even get into who you are, which is an amazing person, or what you do, can you please tell us where you are, what time it is for you?
Yeah, I'm here in Graz, which is a part of Austria, a city of Austria. And currently it's 5 in the afternoon. So it's actually a
I
good
love it.
time for me because I like to sleep in. I always say if the day starts with getting out of the bed, it's a real bad day. So yeah, so I'm really happy for having this in your time
Uh,
zone.
so you're a night owl too, huh? Because I'm right there with you. I'm like, could we have a 7 o'clock meeting PM instead of AM? That's totally me.
Okay. Yeah, it's
Oh,
fine.
and
PM is fine.
Sarah says that she is in Florida, joining us from Florida, drinking coffee. And Ivana is in Sofia, Bulgaria, drinking coffee, water, yogurt, and cucumber soup. We're going to have to talk. I don't think cucumber soup is a thing. Oh, hey, Bartok from Alberta, drinking tea. Awesome. Well, welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have you. Please keep chatting it up. Ask Manfred questions as they come. I'm sure there will be many beautiful ones. And oh, Ed is saying that in Bulgaria, cucumbers are everything. Is it like that where you're from, Manfred? Because cucumbers are not everything here. They're just okay.
Yeah, they are okay-ish, yeah. If you like them.
I was in the store buying one yesterday, and this woman comes up to me and she's like, "You don't want to buy that cucumber." And she starts to tell me which cucumbers are better. And I loved it. I love the tips, but I just thought it was hilarious that I was getting cucumber advice. So this is very relevant. Well, Manfred, could you tell the beautiful audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Yeah, with pleasure. So I'm Manfred, and I'm doing trainings and consultancy for Angular developers. My focus is Angular for enterprise scale applications, and so I'm helping a lot of companies with this topic. Normally, I'm flying around here in
Mm.
Austria and Germany, sometimes also in other countries, but obviously, currently, I'm doing all the stuff remotely, which really works well.
Does
I
it?
Yeah, it really works well
Okay.
because I can connect to your screen. I can help you to
Mm,
fix some bugs. So it's really
mm.
nice.
Do you think after everything normalizes again, you will continue to do a lot of stuff remote now that things are working that way?
I think it will be a good mixture. I mean,
Mm,
before I was in a different federal country each and every week. So I flew a lot around. I even
mm.
have been a senator at Lufthansa, a senator, even though I don't speak any Latin, but I was a senator. And so I think nowadays it will be a good mixture of doing
Mix.
it
Mm.
remotely and on site.
Oh, beautiful. Well, I really do appreciate you and your heart for the community. I've seen it time and time again. So thank you for coming on to do this stream for beginners. Can you tell us a bit about what you're going to talk about today?
Yeah, so I'm talking about a topic that comes with a lot of misunderstandings and so with a lot of bad emotions. It's about
Mm,
subcomponents that communicate with your application via inputs and outputs. And there are some pitfalls and there is some theory you should know in order to make everything appear less magic. And yeah, this is my
mm.
goal today.
I am so excited about this. This is going to be beautiful. Well, if you are ready, I can share your screen and I can hand you the stage because this is a topic I'm really, really excited to hear for beginners. So thank you, Manfred.
I thank you, and yeah, let's start it.
Awesome. All right. There is your screen. Oh, it is beautiful. Awesome. All right. Take it away.
Okay, great. So once again, thanks for having me today. And yeah, this is about subcomponents with inputs and outputs. And basically, I've prepared three things for you. I will start with some theory, with some background theory about how data binding actually works in Angular. And I know sometimes theory is boring, but trust me, this is the good kind of theory because, as mentioned, it makes you uh, understand how Angular is really working and why Angular is behaving in this or that way you would not necessarily expect. Then we will do some practical stuff. We will implement a component that communicates with inputs and outputs, with bindings. And then I will talk about the longest error message you can get in Angular. You need to take a deep breath for it. It's this one. Expression has been changed after it was checked. Error.
Not that one, Manfred. We can't do that one. It's too scary.
Yeah, so this is where the theory comes together with the practice. So let's try it together. We will manage to do this. Okay, cool. So let's get started with the first chapter because this is such a nice habit to start with the first chapter. This is about data binding in Angular. And the thing is to really understand why data binding works that way it works in Angular, you need to have a look at the architectural goals of Angular. And one of the goals there was performance. Fast by default was a big thing when they designed Angular. Another thing is Angular is component oriented. That means the whole application is a component consisting of components. And then it also was about predictability. The idea is you should be capable of easily reason about what's going on there. Is this a property binding? Is this an event binding? Is this a two-way binding? And that's why we've got some special characters. So if we do some history and if we look back to AngularJS 1, then we see that AngularJS 1 back then was very flexible in terms of data binding because you could bind everything to everything else. Here I have two data models, could be a passenger entity from the backend and a flight entity from the backend. And here I have a directive, which is, let's say, something like a component, more or less. Sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. And as you see by looking at the arrows, everything is connected to everything else. This is what I mean when I'm saying it was quite flexible. But this flexibility comes at some costs, because if you changed something here in the bottom right corner, you could also trigger a change here on the top left corner and vice versa and vice versa. And so you could have a lot of further changes. And that means if you changed something here, you did not even see which further changes you will get. It is going up and down all the times. And because of this, AngularJS 1 needed to run in a cycle. It needed to run in a cycle. It needed to check for changes time and again until it recognized that there is no further change anymore. This running in cycles was called the digest, or in general, the digest cycle. And as you can imagine, running in cycles is not a good idea when it comes to performance. And it's also not a good idea when it comes to predictability, finding out what is changing if you change a tiny amount here, a tiny value here. So with Angular 2, we have a completely different situation, because with Angular 2, we have components, right? Everything is a component. The application is a component, and it consists of components consisting of components. And because of this, we can introduce a very simple rule, namely data always flows top-down, from the top to the bottom, when it comes to property bindings. That means the parent can pass data to its children, but the children are not allowed to pass data backwards to their parents. And so our dependency graph, which was a cyclic graph before, is now just a tree, and the tree never has a cycle, as you will see in 1 or 2 seconds. And that means we just need to go through the whole tree once, or to use a term of AngularJS, we just need one digest cycle to synchronize our objects, our tree with components, with the DOM, with your browser window. Yeah, that's quite abstract, but here you see it on the screen. I took the idea of teaching this from Victor Sefkin, who is also a very smart person and who contributed a lot to Angular. And yeah, here we see if we have a data model in our parent component, we can pass some data down to the child components. And then furthermore, some additional data is passed down to their children. It is in a unidirection, if you want to put it that way. It is just one direction the data flows. You don't have any cycles, so you just need to go through it once. And this obviously brings a lot of performance, doesn't it? On the other side, and if you have children, you know it, it is a good idea to listen to your children, isn't it? Because otherwise you have a lot of issues. And because of this, there is a thing called event bindings in Angular. An event binding works the other way around. An event always occurs in a child component, and it is handled in your parent component. That means your parent component has some event handler for on click or on selection changed or whatever. And yeah, so you see, by using this mechanism, you can propagate informations upwards from the child components to the parents, to their event handler, and they can trigger another event to propagate it one level up to their parent level. The best thing about this is that triggering an event is not costly at all. It is very cheap because you even don't need one cycle. You just need to trigger a method, to call a method that was registered. This method is normally called the event handler. So from the framework's perspective, this is really cheap. However, and this is the catch, an event may lead to data updates. You click on search and you have a whole range of new data loaded. You click on select and suddenly your selected line gets another background, a different background color. This is what I mean when I'm saying an event might lead to data updates. And so Angular needs to do property bindings after each and every event handler. So we could draw how Angular works at this point using such a state machine you see here. Here you see at some point in time the application is ready. The application was started, we got initial data binding, the application is ready, it can land back, and it can wait for better times. And then something happens, an event occurs. Some user clicks a button, some users do this, or some user hovers over a picture, something like this. An event occurs, and so Angular starts executing registered event handlers. And an event handler can trigger another event, and so another event handler is called, and so on and so forth. And when all event handlers have been called, Angular recognizes this, and then Angular is doing some property bindings. That means Angular is going down the whole component tree, and Angular is updating the DOM according to the values in your components. And as mentioned, this is necessary because an event handler can change all the data, so you need to go through the components and update them in the DOM in the browser window. Yeah, and then the application is ready again. That means Angular can land back one more time, wait for better times, wait until an event occurs, and then everything starts over again. This is what's called the unidirectional data flow. We always go in one direction. And just one comment here, we will see it at the end. It is not allowed to jump backwards and forwards here, because jumping from A to B and from B to A would cause a cycle. And Angular really tries hard to prevent cycles, because if we had a cycle here, we had all the issues we already had with Angularjs 1, namely a bad performance because of running in cycles, and we cannot easily reason about what's going on here, because one change leads to another change, and that in turn leads to a third change, and so on and so forth.
Do you often see people wanting to do back and forth between the event handler getting executed and property bindings? Is that a common question for beginners, do you think, or not really?
I think it's not a common question. On the other side, it just happens when you code some lines of code, when you program some lines of code, and then you start wondering what is going on here. Is Angular broken? Why do I get this error message we've seen before?
I see.
And so I think it's a good thing to have this learned, to know about this, and that Angular tries you to prevent this. tries hard to prevent this. Okay, yeah. So at the end of the day, you can say you have 3 states or perhaps 2 phases, and the phases are executed sequentially. First of all, the events and then the properties. Okay, so let's come down to the source code level. If you are wondering how to set up property bindings, how to set up event bindings, this is how you do it. To set up a property binding, you use the bracket syntax. To set up an event binding, you use parentheses. And just another tiny remark, using curly braces is nothing else than a shorthand syntax for going with brackets. This here is something like binding the flight date to the text content of your table data. The text content is better known as inner text. I think every one of us already set the inner text of this or that element. So at the end of the day, everything that is about data binding in Angular is about data going top-down using property bindings or data going bottom-up using event bindings. Okay, this was the boring theory, and now I want to put it into practice with you and to use this theory to implement something that helps us in real world. So in this part, and this is the main part of this talk, I will create a component that communicates with bindings, with data bindings, with properties and events with its parent. And for this reason, I just want to implement a card component that looks a bit like this, a card component that displays some key data of a flight. Where do we come from? Where do we go to? Which is indeed the oldest question of humankind. So I also want to implement a basket because I want to put several flights into my basket. And the basket here, for the sake of simplicity, is just an object, just a JavaScript object, mapping the IDs of the flights to true or false. 3 is activated, true. 4, let me zoom in, is not activated, false. So that's why I have a white background. 5 is activated, true. That's why I have this, I don't know what this color is called. I would call it cappuccino or something like this.
Oh my goodness. I was like, brown, and you're like, cappuccino. You're much fancier. We're going with cappuccino.
I don't know, is it really brown? Yeah, perhaps it's brown. I'm not sure. So I'm really bad when it comes to colors, but I'm good when it comes to cappuccino. So let's call it cappuccino. So this is just a basic object, as mentioned, for the sake of simplicity, a basic JavaScript object used as a dictionary here. It makes everything simpler in this example. Okay, so before I implement this, I want to do some design with you. And design means for me sitting down with a pencil and a sheet of paper and thinking about how I want to use this component once it's in place. And yeah, this is how I want to use it. I want to have my flight card and I want to bind some data. I want to bind a flight to display to an item property, or I want to bind a Boolean to the selected property. The Boolean comes out of my basket dictionary and it tells me that basket at the location flight ID is true or false, which means this or that flight is activated or not. Okay, so if you look at this here, then you could say, well, a component in Angular seems to be something like a method you call, a function you call, because each and every function has a name, and so has our component. It's called flight card. And each and every function gets some parameters passed, which is item or selected here. This is one way to see it, one metaphor. Another metaphor is a chip. And perhaps you know it, a chip has some inputs and some outputs, hasn't it? And in former days, people really connected some wires by hand to those inputs and outputs. I was always bad at this. I remember back then in school when we needed to do this, it was a nightmare for me because I'm really clumsy. And so I always asked my granddad to help me with this to get good marks. And yeah, so somehow together we managed to do it. And somehow the same is the situation here. We have a chip, we have some inputs, and now we can connect wires to those inputs. And one wire might be the wire which is transporting the flight to display. This here is connected to the item input. And another wire is the wire transporting the boolean from the basket. It is connected to selected. So both signals flow in to my flight card, and so the flight card knows what to display. How can we implement this? Well, we need a component, an ordinary Angular component, and then we can define properties, and those properties are just decorated with input, and that's it. Now we can data bind something to those properties. Also, I have some methods, tweaking selected a bit. Of course, we also need a template. Here I have a simple div. I am dynamically setting my background color. People told me I should not use this trinary operator. And you know, if someone tells me I shall not use something, then I'm using it on purpose. So I'm doing it here.
Why do they not want you to? Is it bad? Do people not like it? Are they what?
I think some people say it is not that readable because it's a short.
Okay.
It's a short.
But it's not going to cause your program to explode in fire. Like it's not bad in that way. It's
I don't hope so. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting the background color to orange or to light steel blue. And by the way, this is one reason I really love CSS, cascading style sheets. Every time I'm working with it, I'm learning about new colors like light steel blue or crimson. I did not have any clue about them. Yeah, and here I'm doing some data binding, and here I have some buttons connected to select or deselect. Yeah, that's it. Of course, we need to register the component, and then we can use it. So I would say, let's try this out. Let's go to my example. This is the current state. I can search for flights going from here to there. And currently the result is just a table, a good old ordinary table. And yeah, so let's go with a component. Let's call the component flight component. Here I have a little tiny helper tool, generate a component. And yeah, it's flight.
So Manfred, personal question. You're doing it. You're building an app. You need it, right? And you're making it. Do you use your helper tool or do you use like the CLI to generate? Like for you, when you're not teaching, you're just making it happen. Is this your flow?
Normally, this is my flow for regular Angular stuff. Yeah. Okay, I really like the CLI, and I really use the command line for other stuff like ng build or ng serve or ng lint. But when I'm in here, I don't want to change that much. So yeah, this is really my flow.
That makes sense to stay all within the same program. Very cool.
Cool. So let's generate this. And at the end of the day, I think you see it here. It also calls the CLI. So it's about the same as using the CLI on the command line, ng generate component, this and that. And yeah, now let us fulfill it with live. So what do we need here? Well, my flight card component gets an item. Input. Yeah, as you see, input comes from Angular core. And because we have strict mode on now by default, we should either make it null able or undefined able, if this is a term, or we should at least assign a default value, because otherwise strict mode does not allow us to go on here. So perhaps I should say it can be undefined. It's okay. Yeah, I think it will be okay sooner or later. And then let's do the same with selected, which is Boolean or undefined. Okay. Then I had my method select, which is tweaking selected a bit. And we have deselect, which is also tweaking it. Okay, this is the implementation. Let's switch to the HTML. So here I needed to type some HTML, but I'm always saying life is too short for HTML. That's why I always have my folder with stuff I'm using in my labs. So
Life is too short for HTML. That is hilarious.
yeah.
Edwin asks, what extension are you using for generating the components? Do you know the name of the extension?
Yeah, I think I should know it. Is it Angular schematics? Yeah, it's Angular schematics.
Thank you so much.
So paper design, where it is, here it is. Light card.
I feel like I'm doing something wrong because, like, you think life is too short for HTML, but I feel like I could just live in HTML files. I'm like, ooh, but what if we do this to that element? And ooh, what about that attribute? And and people are like, we need the project done. I'm like, yeah, wait, we can tweak.
Nice, nice. Yeah. Yeah, I really need some people like this on my projects because I'm not bad when it comes to programming, but I need other people making it pretty. And so, yeah, it's good to have people with sound HTML and CSS skills on board. Okay, one more time, strict mode.
That's why we're getting the squiggles. It's the strict mode.
Yeah, yeah, because it says, well, item can be undefined, and yeah, it's right. So
Okay.
let's go with the question mark. And yeah, the rest is as seen on the slides. I'm setting the background color. This is cappuccino. And here we have our data bindings and the binding to select and deselect. So I would say, let's try it out. Of course, the CLI already registered the flight card component here in my app module. And let's take this here, the name here, and let's switch over to my flight search component, which is the component you've seen here. There is some table in there, and let's get rid of it. Let's do a diff ng4, let f of flights, and here we can render.
Still to this day, Manfred, I do let F in flights. And then I get an error. And I'm like, why
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
I remember the word of every time?
I really know this issue because I think off does not make that much sense. For me, in makes more sense. And yeah, so it's also really difficult for me. So item and selected. Oh yeah, sooner or later I need a basket. So for the time being, let's go with true. Okay, so let's try this out. I'm clicking here, and yeah, it's a big card, isn't it? But besides this, it seems to be okayish. So also this works. Yeah, I don't have any clue why this is that big, but I will figure out later. It is
Can
not
you
a
show where
showstopper.
you're toggling the button? I don't know if I saw that, where you're saying, like, if it's selected, show this button or hide this button. Like, where is that? Because
Yeah,
I know
sure.
you're setting that. Okay, yeah.
So it is just this method, setting selector to true or to false. And then I
Mhm.
have this data binding that is calling
Oh,
select or
okay.
deselect.
And then you just have the ng if that hides one button or the other.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Awesome. So let's create a basket. Let's put some cuckoo products into it. Flight 3 and flight 5 is pre-selected. Okay. And then let's bind it. F at the position ID or basket at the position FID. And yeah, strict mode. I really need to get used to strict mode, but together we will
You're so brave. You just were you like, you know what, I need to do it, so I'm doing it, and then you turned it on? Like, that's just the decision you made? Because that's called bravery.
Yeah. The thing is, I'm doing this example for 5 years now. And some
Mhm.
weeks ago, we decided to switch the whole workshop to strict mode because it's a thing now. So I really need to
Mhm.
get used to it.
Get used to it, yeah.
Okay, but at the end of the day, of course, it's a benefit.
Mm.
So yeah, now I think this works. Flight 3 is pre-selected. Flight 4 is not pre-selected. Flight 5 is pre-selected, and so on and so forth. And I really hate that this is that high. So let me quickly do something against this. So I don't know. I'm very sorry for this. I know it's not the kind English way of doing things, but
I think it's fine. Slap a height on it.
it was not that a good idea, I guess. No,
Maybe some
let's go
maybe
with
well,
one.
so it cuts off your, let's see, what is it? Oh, so it cuts off too much. Is it because it's, are those cards flexing? Do you know if they're flex styles?
Yeah, I think so.
Where are their styles coming from? Are they in, like, their own
It's
style
actually
sheet, or are they?
Bootstrap. It's actually Bootstrap, and
Oh,
yeah,
it's Bootstrap. Okay,
yeah.
okay. I was like, where did you mystically pull all these styles from? I'm with you now.
I think they changed the names of those classes, but it's okay for showing things. It's okay. So now let me also display my basket. So if we go down here, then I can say, well, let's display the basket. And if we look here now, we see that 3 is selected and 5 is selected. And when I'm selecting the item 156, we see that nothing changes in here in the basket. And that's an issue. And this makes us a bit sad, doesn't it? Because we have Angular, we have data binding, we are changing our stuff, but nothing is really updated. And this is for a good reason. And this is why I showed you the theory before, namely to communicate backwards from the child component, which is the card here, to our flight search component, we need event bindings. At the end of the day, and one more time, this is software design, I want to use it that way. I want to have an event that has the name selected change. And if something was changed, I want to update my basket. my basket at the position f.id. And every time an event is triggered, I get this $event object with some information describing the event. In my case, it's true or false. It's true if it has been selected, otherwise it's false. Okay, so this is how I want to look it alike. And if you look at this, you can think about this like about a method taking a callback. This here is the callback that is always called internally when someone clicks my button, clicks on my card. Thinking on methods, on functions with callbacks is one metaphor. Another metaphor, one more time, is a chip. And here we need to respect that the chip also has outputs where we can connect wires to. Now, one more time, we connect the wire with the flight in question to item. We connect the wire with the current Boolean coming from the basket to selected. And we connect the output back to the basket of the location flight.id. That means the data flows in here, the flight card can display everything, and if we change something, the changes are coming out there and they are put back to our basket data structure. Okay, so the question is, how can we implement such an output? And the answer is we just need another property. It gets the output decorator. It always is from the type event emitter. And the event emitter is typed with the data type we want to transfer. Here, our $event will become a Boolean. Plus, we need to emit our event emitter when something changed. We really need to do this by hand. Angular 1 back then checked this by default, but this was quite an effort for Angularjs, and this was one of the reasons for the bad performance. In the new Angular world, we need to do this by hand because no one knows better than we when we want to propagate some values to the outside. And because we do it by hand, it is really easy. It is as costly as calling a method which is not costly at all. This is the value we want to transfer, our Boolean. And if we compare this to the call side, we see that every time we are calling emit here, the event handler is triggered here, and $event becomes this value. Same for here. Okay, so let's try this out. Let's have a look at our flight card. And let's call it selected change. It's an event emitter. And here you need to take care because, as you see here, there are several event emitters in this world. We need the event emitter of Angular core. So, you know, the golden rule, when in doubt, choose for the right solution. And this is here Angular core. So I want to transfer a Boolean. And yeah, that's it. And every time we are changing something, I'm propagating the value to the outside. So I'm calling my parent, I'm telling him, hey, daddy, I'm selected. And daddy will recognize this and put the value back into the basket. Okay, so let's make use of this. Select the change. This is the value I'm emitting, and yeah, I'm putting it right back where I got it from originally. So let's try this out. Boy, those big cards are really destroying my karma But anyway, yeah, so you see, it really works now. We can also update the basket in the world of our parent. And now I tell you a little tiny something, a little trick, namely, every time you have a combination of X and exchange, something like selected change, or item change, or data change. It does not matter. It's always a combination of something and something change. You can exchange this here by a two-way data binding, which looks like this here. So every time Angular sees this, it transforms into that. That means Angular also assumes that it shall directly write back the emitted value to the original place. And that also shows that at the end of the day, two-way data bindings are just some kind of syntactical sugar in Angular. At the end of the day, everything is about properties and events when it comes to event bindings. So just to prove that I told you the
I
truth.
love that.
Yeah, it works. Okay,
Oh
cool.
my goodness. I love
So
that so much. Do we have time to talk about the daunting error? Can you show it
yeah,
to us? I'm
yeah,
scared. I don't
yeah,
know.
totally. I really like this because this is where the cycle closes back to the theory before I told you that we are not allowed to introduce any cycles here. That means we cannot jump back and forth between property bindings and event bindings. But now I want to show you what happens if I just ignore this rule. And for this, I'm using a method at the end of the property binding, which is emitting another event. So I'm jumping back. And this can actually done quite easily here. I just need to go to the flight card. I need my ng on init. And I'm telling my father, I'm not interested into what you are telling me. I know I'm selected. At the end of the property binding, I'm initiating a new event. And this is a cycle. And now let's have a look at how Angular is reacting. At first sight, everything is true. But at second sight, Angular is complaining. Angular is telling us, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Expression changed after it has been checked error. And this is because we introduced the cycle. Before the cycle, we had this value. Obviously, this is our basket. After the cycle occurred, we had that value. Everything was true. And now, of course, the big question is, how can we avoid such cycles? Or perhaps the first question is even, how can we avoid this error message? And as that often in the real world, there are two answers. A simple answer and a right answer. Let me get started with the simple answer. The simple answer is to trick Angular. You know, every time we web developers don't know what to do to get rid of an issue, we do a timeout. And this is about tricking Angular. So Angular does not recognize the cycle because we are delaying the cycle a bit. We are delaying the cycle to a point after Angular checked for the cycle. So it's for sure not beautiful. So don't do this at home. On the other side, sometimes if it is stressful, perhaps you have a good reason for it, like going home at 9 p.m. o'clock or something like this. So yeah, if you look at this, it still works, and Angular did not recognize that we triggered a cycle. There are no error messages.
So what you're saying is that what we're trying to do is change a value outside of the proper I guess, life cycle that Angular has in mind, and our set timeout is tricking it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if we look at the sequence, what happens here is without the timeout, we are binding the data, we are changing the data in a cyclic way. This is the cycle. And then Angular checks for cycles and cycles, and gives us this error.
Every time I misspell it. Every time. So yeah.
Yeah, every time. Yeah, and if we do it with the timeout, then we just trick Angular. There are several other tricks, but at the end of the day, it's always about tricking Angular. Here we just change the sequence of this. We are changing the data after Angular checked. And so Angular does not recognize this error, this cycle.
So that's our simple answer, but not the right one. What's the right way?
So it's not the solution we deserve, isn't it? Sometimes the solution we need, but not the solution we deserve. And the right way to prevent this, and I know no one wants to hear it, you need to write your application in a different way. You need to write it in a way to avoid a situation like this. And sometimes it's not even that difficult. Normally, when I come to this in my workshops, I'm doing some paintings on a flip chart. Instead of this, I'm using my first love of Windows, namely MSPaint. It was really my first love back then when I discovered Windows. And
I love that you're pulling out MSPaint right now. This is like amazing.
Yeah. So back then it was called Paintbrush. I think that was her maiden name. Now it's called Paint. And if we have the parent here, and if we have the child component here, then what happens in our case is we are doing something that is a bit ridiculous. We are sending data downwards just to correct the parent. So now the big question is, why do we need to send the wrong data downwards? Why can't we just send the right data downwards? And this means we just need to refactor the application. We just need to define the right value in the parent, because if the parent already sets the right value, we can already send downwards the right value, and so there is no reason for correcting the parent, and so there is no way to get a cycle. So this is something we always should keep in mind, sending the right data downwards so that the child components don't need to correct us. I know sometimes it's easier said than done, but perhaps this is a good beginning that guides you a bit when designing such a data binding scenario. Okay, so let me come to a conclusion. We have seen that property bindings always work. Yeah, you are still here. Always work in a top-down manner. And event bindings work the other way around. And every time we did event bindings or we executed the event handlers, Angular needs to do property bindings. It goes through all components. It synchronizes them with your DOM. At least this is the default behavior. And we have also seen we can use input for defining properties in our components and output for events. And as mentioned, we shall not send back wrong data structure, shall not send down wrong data structures to the child components, because if they correct us, we get a cycle. Yeah, that's it basically.
This was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Manfred, for coming on and sharing your time with us and your wisdom. Do you have anything you'd like to, like, if people want to reach out to you, do you have anything that you promote other than your Twitter handle that we have here? Yes. Is there
Well,
anything else you want to shout out to?
I think my Twitter handle is really fine, and perhaps if I really are allowed to shout out to something,
Do
we
it.
are
Shout out.
doing public Angular courses on a regular basis. The next one is about Angular architecture, and in this case, I'm really taking the liberty of putting the
Yeah, I
URL to
will
this
share it
workshop
out.
here.
Do it.
Yeah,
And so anybody can sign up for these. It's not like you have to be with a company or with a larger organization.
yeah. Everything can sign up. If you are a self-payer, if your company does not pay for it, reach out to us. Then we can find a solution to make it a bit more inexpensive for
Beautiful.
you.
Well, I shared that out to the chat, and I thank you so much for your time, Manfred. It was a really wonderful talk. So thank you.
I thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye.